Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Auto-transposable music system through all 12 collections of 7 notes, automatically rotatable to each of the modal centers, changing the tonic as rotated. Part number 5. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', and you need Microsoft Excel to excel at rockin'. Here we are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just work on the part of the table that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab we may refer to, an example tab, in essence the answer key, the practice tab having pre-formatted cells, so you could practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we will continue to work in the blank tab, where we started with a blank worksheet, working from scratch, continuing in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our music skills, but our Excel formatting skills as well, for formatting's sake. Let's go on over to the example tab to get a reminder of our objective, that being to create a musical system so that we can jot down our musical ideas in a way as efficient as possible and have it be transposable to all 12 collections of 7 notes, as well as rotatable through all 7 modal perspectives in all 12 collections of 7 notes, changing the tonic as we do that rotation. Also thinking about how the DAW system will eventually evolve to be, because this kind of formatting is going to be more efficient, helping people, particularly those working by ear, to be able to navigate more easily with these kind of transformations. So we have then our DAW system that we had on the left, just giving us our numbering system. Then we had our numbering system for the local numbers of our notes. We then looked at the Nashville number system and the modal points, in other words, the 7-note perspective, because we're going to be working all the time from the perspective of a 7-note collection, of which there are 12, noting that we could still play all 12 notes, but we're going to look at it from the relative position. That's what's going to give us the 2 dials, allowing us to rotate our perspective once we write our music through all 12 collections of notes and through the modal points. We then looked at our chord constructions, remembering the idea here being that we would like in our DAW system as well as our sheet music system a modern system where we can actually write down chords instead of stacking the notes as is the case in a traditional DAW or sheet music system. Why? Because that's more efficient. So tablature obviously has that. We don't really see that in a DAW or sheet music, where in that system you have to basically stack the notes individually. So this would be a little bit nicer, and we would like to do it more efficiently by removing the note name and instead using the relative position, labeling the collection of notes that we're working in based on the major key, and then the tonic telling us what mode it's in, and then we can name the notes without reference to a note name by relative position, the nodes, the Nashville number system, 1 through 7 Nashville numbers. We can also rotate through multiple ways we can view the chords, which might be more beneficial for people that know the traditional music theory, and other methods for people that don't know traditional music theory, which are actually more efficient, that we can work with. And then we went over here and we said, let's write out our 12 collections of 7 notes, which we can see down here, 12 collections of 7 notes, but then we're representing them not with 1 through 12 numbering system, but rather relative positions. So these are the Nashville numbers, and representing the 5 numbers that are not in the collection of notes by the 0.5. Now note that you're looking at the formula constructed from the point of view of a major scale, meaning this is from the A major, A sharp, or B flat major, B major, C major, D major, and so on, because that's the formula. But of course, we can look at any other perspective or name the collection of notes from any other point in the same collection, changing the modal perspective as we do so. So that's going to be our idea. When we name the collection of notes, we do so from the standpoint of the major, and then we can determine which mode we're in by simply saying what the tonic is that we're working around. We then said this is going to be like the sheet music, modern sheet music, which you might actually write out by hand if you wanted to, just jot down your ideas more efficiently, or part of a DAW system where you would put the information into the system. Now, you might write it down like this, where you have chords and then you have the notes. And the idea here would be that I would like to have one line, as we typically do with tablature, for one octave. Meaning, if I'm going to be writing in this middle place, this 0 stands for the octave that's going to be the middle octave that we would typically work in. So if I choose a collection of notes around the C major, then this middle is going to start with the lowest note as the C4, traditionally a C4. If I start with the lowest note being a G major, then the lowest note in this middle area should be the G, which would be a G4, right? And then it's going to go 12 notes up when we start from here. So notice we're talking about octaves relative to the key that we've chosen to be in, and then we can write everything more succinctly, as opposed to having it broke out in a DAW system, in which case we'd have to break it out this way, not using chords and having a much more convoluted kind of setup to be able to visualize what's happening. Now, noting also that it would be easier to actually write this way, removing the note names, not using note numbers, we're using Nashville relative numbers, meaning 1 through 7, Nashville numbers. And you could still do that and focus on something other than the Ionian mode. It would actually be easier, particularly for people that don't know music theory, to rotate through the modes. They will not get trapped with the piano keyboard locking them into the key of C or the Ionian mode, right? Because then you can just say, look, you have 7 notes, whatever one's your tonic, that's going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes. Meaning, if you're going to use the 3 note as the tonic, that's going to be the Phrygian node. That will be the lowest note in each of the octaves, and then you can just play your thing with a keyboard, with a 10 key on the like you would as an accountant, which is attractive for me. If I'm working the DAW, I don't want to be having a piano keyboard. The piano's beautiful, but I want to work it like a calculator. Why? Because it's a computer. We should have a different instrument for the computer. The data input should be focused for a computer, not a piano. It's not a piano, okay? So that would be easier for people that don't know the piano, which many people don't. All right, and then we can take that and we can transpose it this way, breaking it out to the traditional DAW system. This would be the behind the scenes number, and we could also put the letters in a traditional DAW thing. So this could all be mapped out, and I believe at some point the DAW will be formatted this way. Why? Because it's more efficient. So that's where we're at now. So we're going to be on this part now. So I'm going to go back on over to the blank tab, and so now what we did is we did this bit, and now and then we made the one down here. So this bit up top I wrote, and we're imagining that we're writing it from the perspective of relative position. So instead of having traditional chord names, we're saying this is a note, there's a number of notes, 4-note Aeolian chord. Or you might even say it's a note 4 note, and then instead of Aeolian, you could put a 6 for the Nashville number 6. People that don't know music then will be able to see that and say, well, look, I'm just using the Nashville numbers and I'm making a chord off of the 6, which under the key of C, which would be the Aeolian, but it would be all the same for all relative 12-note collections. Okay, and then here we're writing the Nashville numbers. Now again, you could do it the other way, meaning I could write actually the letters here, or possibly the note numbers if you wanted to do it that way, and then convert it to this. So if you're in a database program, you should be able to choose either way you want to do the data input. But again, I would recommend, if you're a songwriter or something like that, this is a more efficient way to write down your ideas because then you can play with them, even if you do it by hand. Because then you don't have to rewrite them to transpose them to all 12 keys. You just say, look, I'm going to play this in the key of C, and then I'm going to play it in the D major, and so on and so forth, because all of the relative positions will shift up, and you can easily do that. All right, so that's going to be the idea. And then down here, I want to be able to transpose it so that I can see the proper octaves into consideration. So remember, like when I'm thinking about it this way, I'm thinking that this middle point, the octave that we're in, is going to start on whatever the lowest note is that we're playing. Meaning, if I'm playing in C major, then the lowest note is going to be the Ionian note, in this case a C. But if we're playing in the Dorian, I would like the lowest note to actually be the 2, the Dorian, and then we would go 12 steps up from that. If I want to play the note down from that, the 1 down, the Ionian down, then that would be a lower pitch note. It would be down in this column. So I think that's the most logical way to do it. But when I write it up here, we can only see the middle. So then the question is, well, how can I take into account that octave so that when I map it out over here in the standard MIDI system, it's going to be in the right category? Meaning, is it going to be down here in the middle range? This middle range is the orange range. And then when I go up another category, it's going to be up here. So this middle range that is red is only going to be if I'm playing C major. If I was playing in Dorian, I would want to move this middle category up to here, from here to here. So I'd still be playing the same notes if it was a Dorian, but if the pitch of the notes would be different in terms of octave, because I would be starting on this D, which would be like a D4, and then going up to this D, right, instead of C to C. All right, to do that, we have to use absolute numbers. So we put the absolute numbers over here, and we'll use the MIDI system numbers. Now, we could use absolute numbers that I think are more logical for human beings, meaning I would like to have our numbers local number system for the notes here. And then if I want absolute numbers, then I can count up from there, meaning A through G sharp should be 1 through 12. But if I want to take into account octaves, then the next A could be 13, 14, 15, right? And the local distance should be like 16 minus 12, 6 minus 2, 4. And so I think that would be useful to have in like a MIDI system as well. But I don't want to get too convoluted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the MIDI numbers, which is for the computer, where they basically just started way back further than they think they need to go, right? Which would be -1 when you're thinking about the normal octaves, and then they just counted up from there. So what that means is that the middle C is going to be down here. So middle C is at 60, and then it goes up from 60. Now, of course, as a human being, if I'm playing middle C most of the time, I don't want to call it 60. I'd rather call it 1 or 4, something that's not going to be as cumbersome to say and remember. But that's what we'll use. This is kind of like the behind the scenes thing that we'll put in for the MIDI, so that whoever is finally going to do this and make the system in a DAW could use the same underlying system. Okay, so then what we'll do, how do we do that then? Okay, so let's go here. Let's first think about what we want to do. I want to pull this information down there, and the chord names, I can keep those the same, but these I want to be converting to the absolute note number rather than these numbers, which are the Nashville numbers, relative position numbers, so that I can then convert those absolute numbers to the correct position over here. Now, these absolute numbers you can see are here, so I have the absolute numbers here, and these are the relative position numbers. So for example, let's first just pull it down. I'm going to say this equals this orange bit right there, enter, and I'm going to copy that across. And so there we have that, and then I'll take this whole thing and I'm going to add decimals. So I'm going to add decimals. All right, so these are fine, but I need to come up with a formula that will keep these the same, but then replace this with the proper note number. So I have these relative positions over here. I can pull from the red part, because the red part in my DAW represents the one octave that we're currently working in. So meaning if I'm going to be playing, if I assign this to be the key of C that we're going to be playing in, then we're going to have one octave up is going to be from this point, which is represented over here by relative positions, meaning the 1, 2, 3 is like the Nashville number system. So here's the Nashville number system. Here's the absolutes that are taking into account octave. The middle C then is a 60 for the MIDI system. 60 doesn't really mean anything to us other than from just the MIDI kind of system to map out the octave. Okay, so then the question is, well, how can I do that? I'm going to go underneath it and try to build this thing like piece by piece and then put it on top here. So in other words, let's start here. If I'm on this 1, I want that 1 to be 60. I want that 1 to be 60. Okay, so let's say this is going to be an X lookup, and I want to look up then this one, that one right there, comma, where do I want to look it up? I want to look it up in this range, not the whole thing, just the range that's in the red, because the red represents the orange part of this table. And then comma, I want you to return to me then these numbers that are going to represent not just that it's a C, but the proper octave. And so I'd say enter. So that is fine. So that works. If I double click on that, I can F4 over here, F4, 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 and I can copy this across this way. And I think that works all the way across, right? The 2 is representing the 62 and so on. I could copy it across this way, and I'm going to have a problem. Why? Because obviously this cannot be found in this range. So now I'm going to say, well, if you can't find it in the range, we have this nice little thing at the end. So if I go in the end and I say another comma, it says, if it's not found, what do you want us to do? Well, that's convenient. If it's not found, I want you just to do what's in this cell, which it won't let me click on. I just want you to do that. So just do that. So I'm going to say enter, and boom. So now if it's a number, it's gonna pull the relative number over here, and if it's not a number, then it's gonna just give me that, which is perfect. So I can copy that across, and that works all the way across with the same uniform cell. So no matter what I do the data input up top, I can make this a number or not, and it should do the proper thing. All right, undo that. And so now, so that's great, but what if there was nothing up here? Like that was just blank. Then it puts in a 0. That's not bad, actually. It'll stay at a 0. Let's keep it at that. We'll say, okay, that's fine. That's fine. All right, so then, so that's that. So let's go ahead and copy this. I'm gonna I wanna put this where I want it to be up top now. So to do that, I can't just copy and paste it. I gotta double click on it so I can copy it this way. That way it won't change the reference number. So I'll copy that formula, double click up here and paste it there, boom. Wait, what? I didn't like that. I'll paste it here, boom, and then enter, okay. And for some reason it's doing something funny. Let me do this again. This is pulling in. Oh, it's the wrong cell. This should be pulling in this cell up top here, and this should be pulling in this cell up top here. Boom. All right, does the same thing. Double click. Now I'm going to copy that, enter, and paste it here. Boom. And then I'll copy that across. Okay. And then what if I make this 0? What if I make this blank? It's 0. Okay. So then that's good. So I'll go, okay, and then I can copy this up. I can copy this up here and paste it up here to paste formulas only. Now, up here though, I'm going to be an octave up, right? So now I'm an octave higher. So that means that the range shouldn't be in the red part. It should be an octave higher. So I'm just going to pull this whole thing up to here. And then up to here. And then everything else should be the same. So boom. And so then if I copy that across, these are the same, but over here, now the numbers are higher. That 72 still represents a C, but it's an octave higher. And so that's the formula here. And if I copy this whole thing again, copy, paste up here, formulas, then double click, then I just need to move this up to the next one up. Boom, boom. And then I'll move the ranges up, boom, boom. And then enter, and I can copy that across. And so now this 84 represents a C, but it's 2 octaves up. So now you can see how we're entering this. This is going to be in the range we typically work on. And then if I go up to this range, this is going to be an octave up. Now I left some lines here because in theory, I'm going to say, well, you could add rows and still work in the same octave, possibly if you wanted to do something like that. I feel like that should be doable. I don't want to get in that in detail. But if I copy this down below, if I go lower, I'm going to copy this one and then paste formulas and double click over here. Now I could do this, and I need to move this down, right? And I can move this down. Enter. So then let's copy this across. So now I get this is a 48, right? So 48 is now the C down here, which I kind of feel like what happened here. This should be green. Let's format paint this up top to be green. Isn't that right? Down to C, okay. And then I could do the same thing down here. Copy this down here. Oh wait, undo. Copy this and paste it, formulas only. And then this is going to be down to here. And so there we have it. Bam. Bam. Okay, and if I copy this across, so now this 36 represents this 36. So now that allows me to then populate this over here in my DAW system so that it takes into account which range these should go into, right? Which range those should go into. Okay, now I could do this again and copy this down again because I'd also like to see this with the letters. So maybe I want to be able to transpose this to see it in relative position this way, or to see it with our letters and traditional chords. So I'd like to be able to transpose or go back and forth between this chord notation and any of the other chord notations, but I'll just go with this one for now. So let's copy this whole thing down. So I'm going to take this and I'll do it again. Paste it down here, but I'm going to delete this bit in the middle for now. And so there we have it. So now we're going to do another kind of a fancy formula. But to do that, I'm going to do a little trick because this is the only way I could figure out to do it. And that is over here, I want to label these columns and give them the actual range so that I have all the ranges that I can copy across in my formula. So when I copy the thing across, it'll pick up the range that's in one cell. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to put my cursor here up top and let's right click and insert. I'm going to shift the cells down. Okay, so then I'm just going to name this range. This range, if I was to name it, would be from AH2 to AH13. I'm going to put that range name up top. So I'm just going to call it AH2 colon AH13. Now, why do I want to do that? Well, the reason I can do that is because then when I reference this range, I could just reference this cell. And I could say, hey, look, don't take the cell, but take the range that's in the cell. And then when I copy it across, it should be able to pick up that same range. That's my idea, right? So let's pull this out like this and say, let's make this larger so it can see that. And I'll make this a little smaller. And let's do that all the way across. So I'm gonna copy this. Hold on a second. All right, let's copy this across. Copy and then paste, and then I'll just change. So this goes from AI instead of AI because that's the AI up top, and this is going to be instead of it's AJ, and so we have AJ, and then this is going to be AK, so we have AK, and then this is going to be AL. So we're going to say AL, AL, and this is going to be AM, AM, and this is going to be AN, AN, and this is going to be AO, AO, and this is going to be AP, and AP, and this is going to be AQ, AQ, and this is going to be AR, R, AR, and then AS, as. All right. So then I'll make this header black and white, maybe, just to make it look nice. Make it black and white. All right, so then I'm going to use that in our formulas over here. So how can I use that over here? Okay, so let me go over here, and then I'm gonna, all right, so I'm gonna put on the side over here that this is gonna be number 4. So this is gonna be number 4, which is once again our kind of key that we're working in. That's gonna stand for the key of C. In other words, I'm gonna do an X lookup, that 4, comma, and then I'm gonna go up top and say find that 4 in this range 1 through 12, comma, and return the letter. So meaning a 4 represents a C. 4 is going to give us the C. So I'm going to say enter. Now I want to make this my new key. So I'm going to make that the yellow bit right here, because this is going to be my data input screen possibly. So I'd like the key to be over here, whereas we had it before over here, meaning this 4 is what we've been using to populate everything. So if I change this 4 to a 6, everything's going to be related to the D. So now I'm going to say this is going to be equal to this. Whoop, where did it go? This 4. So now this is the key. This is the pivot point that's going to change us through all the 12 collections of notes. Enter, and I'm going to yellowify this. Then this will change now when I change this one, right? So now if I change this to a D, boom, a 6 is going to be a D, and that changes everything in terms of the chords and so on, as we can see over here. All right, so great. So now I'm also going to put down here, now this is where it gets tricky. I'm going to say this is going to be equal to, well, let's do it this way. Hold on a second. It's got to be an X lookup. I'm going to say, let's bring this back to 4. And I'm going to say this equals X lookup. Find that 4, comma, up top. You want to find that 4 here, which is our alphabet, our collection of notes. This is our collection of notes, but it's going to be based on not a 12-note collection, but relative position. Here's the collection of notes 1 through 12 based on the 12 notes, A through G, 1 through 12. So take that, comma, and then return to me these ranges. So that means that I can determine which of these ranges should be in my formula this way, right? So I can say enter. I'll show you this in a second. It's a little abstract, but it's not too difficult once you kind of get it. So we're going to say that range then represents the range of notes for the key of C. If I change this to a 6, that changes this range that I want to use in the formula that I'm going to have over here for the key of D. So that's going to make it possible for me to do our formula. So then we're going to go back on over here and say, okay, So what do I want this to do? So let's start with the basics again. I'm going to say this is going to be equal. I'm not going to be working with these numbers because I don't want to work with my DAW numbers now. I'm going to go back to the OG numbers up top. I want you to take those numbers and then convert it. I want to convert these ones to the conventional formatting of a C. This should say C major. A 3-note Ionian should, in the key of C, should be converted to a C major. And this, number 1, should be converted to a C because these are relative positions and I want to see the note names now. So if I just say enter, this is what I currently have up top that I want to convert. I want to convert these to traditional chord names, and then I want to convert these to notes as opposed to this. Okay, so how could I do that? All right, so we could do this piece by piece. Let's think about it for a second. So for this one, let's write it down here. I could say this equals X lookup, that's not X lookup, X lookup tab, and I want to find this one here, comma, and I want to find it in my chord names. So here's all my chord names, from the Ionian node to the Lydian node to the Mixolydian to the Aeolian and so on down to the Locrian. So I want to look in there, comma, and then I want to return the traditional names. So right now it's a C major because that 4 represents a C, and if I change that 4 to a D, it would be a D major. So now I'm taking into account not just the modal point, but actually the note in the collection of notes that we've assigned to it. So I'm going to say enter. So there's that, boom. And so that gives us that bit. So that makes sense. So, but that's not going to work when I copy it over here, obviously, because it's not going to do what we want to do when we get on this side. Let's double click on it. Let's also F4 here, F4, F4, F4. So the ranges stay the same. And then I could copy that across, but it's not going to work once I get here, right? So that works fine for the chords, but it doesn't work over here. Okay, so what about this bit when I get on this side? What do I want this to do? Well, this basically what I want it to do is convert that 1. So I'm going to say X lookup. I'm going to do the 1 up top. I want to find this 1 up top, comma, and then I want to find it in these relative positions, the Nashville numbers, and then return to me, comma, column 4, or the column this 4 that's based on the key of C. So if I do that, then it's going to enter a 4. Now wait a sec, it would be a little bit easier if I did it this way. Equals X lookup tab. And we pick up that 1, comma, and then I'm going to go over here and say, no, that's the way I have to do it. I'm going to say, so then I'm going to find it in here because that's the 4. All right, I could go down here and find it here, comma, and then in the C column, pull that one up, boom. It didn't work because they're not evenly. I think I pulled the wrong length. So this one I didn't go all the way down. It has to be an even. So that would give me the C. Okay, so that's great. The problem is that if I copy this across, it doesn't know what column to draw from. It doesn't know what column to draw from. Meaning if I change this to a 6, then these numbers change, but this doesn't. This is still based on that 1 column. I need to shift the column. So that's where we have this shifting going on. Now I think I can just transfer this down so that the range should actually be down here. So the range should actually be down here from the 15 to the 26. Let's see if I can change that. This is going to be, let's make this 15. This might make it a little bit easier. To 26, tab F2. So let's go 15 to 26, tab F2, 26, starting at 15, tab F2, 26, back on over here to 15, tab F2, 26, over here, 15 tab F2 26 over here 15. I might be able to do this a little bit easier with a find and replace, but 26 and 15 tab F2 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 26 and 15. Okay, so now that's what's going to show up down here. So what I'd like to do instead is have this reference over here. So if I bring this back to a 4 and I go, okay, let's double click in here and say, I want to find that. And then I want to find it in the return area. I want to return this. Now the problem is that's not the range, but I want it to return the range which is inside of that cell, right? So I'm going to say enter. It doesn't give me what I want. But if I say, I think it's go in front of the, if I go in front of this and I say, I want you to do an indirect tab and then bracket that, that's basically saying, I believe that I want you to take the range inside of the cell, and so that it'll pick, so it should populate. Boom. So now I can change this and to like a 6, and it then changes the proper range. So I'm not referring to the actual range up here, but I'm referring to these ranges up top, which are assigned to the proper location. Okay, so that's great. So that's pretty cool, I thought. So if I double click on that, then this needs to be F4'd, so F4 on the keyboard, and then I can copy that across. And oh, wait a sec, that's not right. F4, and this needs to be F4'd. So I'm going to say F4 here and F4 here, and then I can try to copy that across again. Boom. Okay, but that's not going to work on when I copy it on this side. So I've got to put those two things basically together now, so that it will have both of those components. Okay, so how can I do that? I'm going to say this is an XLOOKUP of that, and then you give me that. But if I copy this over here, let's think about that. Then it's going to give me an NA. So if it gives me an, so what if I can't find that? Maybe I can then say, comma, if you can't find that, then you're going to do this bit, right? So what if I copy this bit and I say, then let's take this whole thing, copy it, and on the NA, I'm going to go into the end of this XLOOKUP and say, comma, if you can't find that, do that bit right there. But this one should be referring to, if I scroll up, they should both be referring to this one, so it's in the same column. And then enter. So there, boom. I think that works. So if I copy that across, so this should be a C though, so this is referring to that one. Why is it pulling a D? That's weird. If I copy this across this way, oh, I changed it to a D. Yeah, that makes sense. So then if I go up top and go here and change that to a 4, boom, I think that works, right? So now it's converting it over. So then now I can put this up here by just double clicking here, and I'm going to copy this whole thing this way. I can't copy the cell or it will change the relative positions. But if I copy the actual formula and then go in here and say paste, boom, copy that across, bam. Okay, I think that works. So then I can also copy this up top. Now again, this doesn't show me the octaves here, but we're going to make the assumption that, like, if this was a 6, then the D would be the lowest in what I'm working on, which is the 0 octave from that perspective. And then we would go 12 up to there to the next D. If this was a G, an 11, then the lowest would be a G. That would be the lowest note in what I'm working on, octave 0, and then we would go up from there in the middle point. That's how I think just logically the worksheet would make sense, so that we can then have one octave here and then another octave up here and so on. So then we could say, if this is a 4, I can copy this back. I can copy this up here and paste it formulas, and it works. Why? Because it keeps that the same. That's correct. And then it pulls this one up top. So this is going to give us the same numbers because I have the same test numbers, but it's actually pulling from the octave up. So I can copy this across this way, and that should work. And then I can take this whole thing and just paste the formulas here. Boom. Paste the formulas here. Boom. Paste the formulas here. Boom. Just for the test. We would never write a song, obviously, that has the same thing in the multiple octaves. But if I'm working in the middle octave, it works for the test of the notes that are now converted. And then if I was writing up here, the same notes are now converting. These are different because this would be an octave up, which would be represented by where it's located here. And it would be octave number 1 in relative position to whatever I'm working in the middle position. And then, of course, when I transpose it to my worksheet over here, which I would do with this number system, then it would be worked out. This would be the middle one here based on this numbering system. And then the ones up top would then be up here, and so on and so forth. So we'll continue on with that next time.